My name is Jeanette Woods. I work at WHYY. I'm a producer. I know these folks through various ways, and I'm very, very excited to be up here with them. I think Campus Conversations is an amazing program. I think it should be at every campus, and I hope that you will all decide to join in the discussion with us. So, to my right, Solomon Jones. Am I right? Right? Okay. Solomon Jones is an award-winning journalist, broadcaster, and best-selling author of 8 novels. He can be heard every morning from 7 to 10 a.m. as the host of WURD 900 a.m.'s morning program, Wake Up with WURD. Solomon writes a weekly column, The Family Man, for the Philadelphia Daily News. His blog, The Philadelphia Experiment, is published weekly on newsworks.org, and he is a guest commentator on WHYY. He just had a guest commentary tonight.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. James Peterson is Director of Africana Studies and Associate Professor of English at Lehigh University. He's the founder of Hip Hop Scholars Incorporated, an association dedicated to developing the cultural and educational potential of hip hop, urban and youth cultures. James has written for numerous publications, and he's a regular contributor to MSNBC, and he hosts the WHY podcast, The Remix. He is also author of several books, including his newest on the hip hop underground and African American culture. And to my far right, Sofiy Ballin is an award-winning journalist and features reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and she's a blogger for the Huffington Post. She's also reported and edited for Jump, Philly Music Magazine, and has contributed pieces to Ebony.com. Sofiy began her writing career at 17, crafting personal stories for the natural hair website, The Oil Review. And as a reporter, she's written about trends like cuffing season, which you're going to have to explain to me, because I'm that age, and you're that age.
We're in the middle of it right now.
Yeah, I know. And the emergence of Black Twitter, and she's covered major news events like Ferguson and the Baltimore protests. So, welcome. I have to say, Giannis sent me these questions from the students, and they're all amazing questions. We don't have that much time, so I've had to whittle them down, and it's been tough. And hopefully you'll add your own questions to it as well. So I'm going to open with the first question here. Oh, opening remarks. I'm sorry. Can't take that away from journalists. All right, that is correct. Let me back up. Who would like to start opening remarks? James. We'll start with Sophia.
I'll start. I'm laughing with Sophia because Sophia would ask this up.
I would have let it.
She's brilliant but very, very shy. First, a couple of things. I want to thank Giannis for putting this together and working with Jeanette to pull it together, because getting the 3 of us to sit down at one time is kind of like herding cats. It's not the easiest thing to do because we're out here trying to do the work. So kudos to you for pulling it all together and making it happen. This is my first time on campus here. 2 beautiful campus. We're very excited to be here. So I'm glad so many people came out. And you're going to have to shut me up in 5 minutes because you know I can talk. So, you know, a few years back when Rodney King died, I wrote a piece for the Daily Beast that started out with a sentence. And that sentence stated that death is the new black, right? And what I was trying to capture in that moment was the sense that I had. It was a very heavy sense that I had in my heart, that we had to understand Rodney King's death in a particular context. And there's 2 contexts I want to share with you, just as an opening here. One, we needed to understand that holiday video of the beating of Rodney King was a watershed moment in the history of Black death at the intersection of multimedia. Those of you who are in here are probably born in the 90s or a little bit too young to appreciate this. But that was one of the first videos around this issue that went viral. And it went viral at a time where the internet was not the superhighway yet. It went viral at a time where there was not any social media. It went viral at a moment before things could go viral. But the second piece of this context that we have to understand is that Rodney King died years later as a result and consequence of that beating. And so although we don't necessarily associate his death with that moment on that videotape, because of the span of years in between them, those two things are connected. Now, for me, as someone who has to sort of cover these issues and talk about them frequently on the Remix or on MSNBC or whoever's asking me to talk about it, the reason why the Rodney King moment hit me so hard is because, one, I realized that although there was a gap and people wouldn't associate his death with the brutal beating that was videotaped in that Halliday videotape. By the way, he was using a VHS video camera. You guys know what VHS tape is? Okay, just checking to make sure, right? That people wouldn't connect those things, but also people wouldn't understand, I think, what it takes for us to sort of pay attention to these things. So some of you in here can probably check out when the media wants to cover police brutality or unrest in a community that's being terrorized by police. But for some of us in the media, we don't really have that choice, right? We have to, it's part of our job to sort of be aware, to cover, and to talk about it. And for me, Rodney King's passing signaled a certain moment in my career where I was going to have to be vigilant and aware of Black death in a way that in some times and on some days can be absolutely debilitating. And so, you know, I remember when the Charleston massacre occurred, and I thank Jeanette for editing and publishing. I wrote this crazy piece about it, and Jeanette allowed me to kind of vent through it. But something like that happens, and you know, I'm going to get called to comment on it and talk about it. And those are the kind of situations and the kind of days that we have sort of working through some of this madness that are some of the toughest days for us to sort of persevere through. So I'm happy to be here and happy to talk about all of these issues, and I think it's important for all of us to be vigilant about the issues that are at stake. But just from the perspective of someone who is wrestling with what that coverage means, it ain't always easy.
Very interesting that Giannis mentioned media mattering. I think sometimes we don't realize how much influence the media has. I look at the media as a mirror. It's a reflection of our society, because the media is also, it's not just the news, it's also our entertainment. It's a reflection sometimes of how we want to see ourselves, or how we see ourselves, how we see each other. It can affect how we see each other. In terms of race in the media, I think that in this country, race and the media have had a tight-knit relationship for a very long time in terms of perpetuating certain caricatures and sometimes prejudice. And it's sad sometimes the way you see it kind of manifest in the way our news is covered, right? So if you look at Hurricane Katrina, you see the black family is looting and the white family is foraging for food. I actually just read today, like a study said that in TV news and on newspapers, blacks and Latino suspects are also more likely than whites to be presented in a non-individualized and threatening way. So when you watch your TV news, most of the times when you see the mugshots, the photos that they show will be of black people. So in terms of today, when we talk about police brutality today, I thought it was interesting that you were talking about, you know, death is the new black, and what that kind of does to the black psyche. Waking up in the morning, I remember after the 2 reporters were shot, live on TV, CNN was talking about it, saying, okay, we're going to only show it once every hour for like 15 seconds. I was like, good, you know, this is a tragic event, no one should see that. But then I thought, you know, I remember when Walter Scott was shot, and they show it on loop for 2 weeks. I'm waking up and I'm watching that, you know, seeing Eric Garner, you know, on TV doing that. What does that do to the black psyche? What does that tell black youth? How does that make you feel? That makes you feel disposable, almost. So I think that the media is a mirror, and our jobs are so important because we affect how people see themselves and treat each other and see each other. People trust us with their stories, and it's our responsibility almost to tell the whole truth. And sometimes it's a matter of life and death, right? So take Darren Wilson, for example. The New Yorker did a profile on him and said, you know, he didn't really grow up with a lot of black people. So you have this guy, he didn't really broke with a lot of black people, and now he has to police a predominantly black community. So if this guy's only introduction to black people is through the media that he's watching, where he's seeing caricatures, where he's seeing black men in playing hyper-aggressive roles on TV, where he turns on his TV news and he's seeing mugshots, where when he's watching coverage on Hurricane Katrina and seeing black people looting, it makes you question, what did he see? Who or what did he see when he saw Mike Brown? And I think the answer to that tells us how crucial it is that we have this discussion on race in the media and where it intersects. So yeah, that was.
But as a columnist, it was really out of necessity because I was working at the Philadelphia Weekly. Didn't pay a lot of money. My wife got pregnant and said, I'm going to stay home and raise our children. And I said, because what that meant is that I would have to work all these jobs. And as those who know me know, I work a whole lot. Right? And I'm happy to do it to take care of my family, to take care of my children. But it really is about fatherhood for me. So when I started writing as a columnist, I was writing about my family because I was working in politics and I couldn't have that conflict of interest, and everything is political. The only thing I had left to write about was me, my experience, my family. So I wrote about things like the very first time that my wife had me go and get feminine products for her. And it was hilarious and it was real, and I wrote about, her getting pregnant and having the air conditioner like cranked up to like Arctic, while I'm laying there freezing. But then, when things started happening around race, it was really, I think for me, the same thing, James, a watershed moment where it's like, okay, you can continue to write these things and try to present the black family in a way where people can understand that we do the same things that you do, right? That we have the same aspirations that you do, that we actually have men and women who are married and raising children, right? That, you don't have to stare at us at a restaurant because we're eating just like you, right? And so that was one thing, but then black people started getting killed in the street. And so fatherhood for me meant standing up for what might happen to my children. Being afraid for my children, having a conversation with my son when he was just 10 years old about, okay, this is how you should respond when you are stopped by police. It's a conversation that no father should have to have with a son that young. I had that conversation and I wrote about it in the Daily News, and Nightline called me up, and then we had that conversation on Nightline, and all of that was interesting, and my son, I'm sure, will never forget it, but it really speaks to the fact that the whole Black Lives Matter thing, talking about what happens with black men, no, it's not about what happens with black men, it's about what happens with black children. Because black children are more likely in preschool, right, to get suspended. In preschool, you're talking about 5 years old. Like, what can you do at 5 years old to get suspended from school, right? But black children make up, 18% of children in preschool programs, but they account for about half of the suspensions. And so we talk about unequal treatment of adults. No, it starts when we're children. And so, anything that I write about, anything that I talk about concerning Black Lives Matter, is something we shouldn't even have to say, right? But we do. Anything that I write about, speak about, talk about concerning this is really about my children and really about standing up to make sure that they're treated equally. Because in too many instances, and I love using statistics and studies around this, they're not. They just did a study in St. Louis County of the family court system, and they found that black children were treated differently just because of their race. They looked at 33,000 cases over the course of years. And I wrote about it, and I had a guy say in the comment section, I love the comment sections, the comment section is the new white hood. Because people can hide. You can hide behind a keyboard. And the guy said in the comment section, oh, those are politicized studies, and they're only doing that for political purposes. I'm like, dude, they studied it for years, thousands of cases. And, oh, it's just politicized, and by the way, I serve on a school board. And so these are the people who are dealing with our children. And so that's why I write about it, that's why I speak about it, and that's why I'm glad to be here.
Because of what you said, I will start with this question to anyone. Do you feel that you have to speak in the media as representative of or on behalf of all African Americans?
Is that a trick question? Well, every student of color knows this, in this room right now, knows this dilemma, which is, and I've been wrestling with this since I was an undergraduate. Where, you're in a classroom and something about race comes up and the teacher looks at you, right, to provide the answer. And there's only one way for me to look at it, and that is, I go back to the Charles Barkley moment. Remember when Charles Barkley threw somebody through a window pane and people were like, man, Charles, you're being a terrible role model. You're being a bad actor. And Barkley was like, I'm not a role model, right? And that was a really frustrating moment for me, not only because I looked up to Charles Barkley, but because I've worked with young people my whole life. And the reality is, Charles Barkley doesn't have the choice to not be a role model. He can say he's not a role model, but when you look at reality, young people look up to him. And so when you feel that burden of representation in a classroom or at a predominantly white institution, I think you have to take Barkley's hiccup into account, which for me means that I can certainly say as a member of the media that I don't speak for all black people. And if you look at my clips on MSNBC, you'll see me saying that a lot. Like, look, I can't represent like 15 million people. Like, that's crazy. But the reality is, a lot of times when I'm speaking in certain audiences, people think that I am representing the viewpoints of millions. And so I have to be very measured in how I respond to that. On the one hand, I do want to always acknowledge the fact that black folks are not monolithic. It's absurd to think so. The four of us here have a wide range of viewpoints and ideas about a wide range of topics and issues, but I also have to deal with the reality. And in reality, if you step onto the public space, if you're writing for a major news media publication, if you're on a major radio station, or if you're appearing nationally on television, there are going to be some people who will encounter your work as being representative. I think the charge and the challenge for me personally is to understand that, which means it's not always about what my personal thoughts are. It is understanding that and how I respond to things. That makes it more complicated, but I don't think there's any way to slip that yoke if you're in the public sphere. Unfortunately, we live in a world where people think of black folks as being monolithic. And where people really embrace like narratives of black exceptionalism. So people love to think of me, a kid who comes from Newark, New Jersey, as somehow being indicative of the fact that everyone who's poor in Newark, New Jersey should be able to get a PhD in the Ivy League. You can't slip the yoke of the burden of representation. And although it's unfair for any of these students here to have to represent 15 million people, unfortunately, that's how some folks will look at you and interpret
I agree.
this.
I never think that I speak on behalf of all black people, but I do understand that it will be interpreted that way. And I always tell young black journalists that, sometimes when you're writing about black people, the harshest critiques that you will get sometimes will be from the black community, because they know, even though they know that you don't think you're speaking on behalf of all black people, they know it will be interpreted that way, that you're speaking for them. And you're talking about, when you're writing about a group of people whose stories have been told wrong for hundreds of years, so you better get it right. So I always tell young black journalists that your harshest critics will come from there, because they know that when people hear you speak, you're speaking on behalf of all of them.
I've been a radio host for about a year now. And I know for a fact that all black people do not think that. Some of us are very eccentric, and I'm being kind because we're in mixed company. And some of us are intellectual.
You make crazy.
Yeah, they crazy. They crazy. Some of us are intellectual. Some of us, have these conspiracy theories. Some of us think that everything is about racism. Some of us think that nothing is about racism. And so I know that we have a very diverse group of people within our group. And I like it like that. And I know that when I speak, I'm not speaking for all black people, but I also know that in many ways we're more segregated than we've ever been. And so for some people, when they see me on television or hear me on the radio or see my articles in the newspaper, I might be the only black face that they've seen. Right? And so, I take the responsibility very seriously of speaking as a black person, but I know I don't speak as the black person. And for me, that takes a lot of pressure off. Because I know that I'm going to get crazy responses from all kinds of people, people who look like me, people who don't. One of the people who says the very meanest things about black men that I have ever heard is a black woman who calls my show regularly and blames everything on black men, chiefly me. And so it's like, I've learned that, all I can do is try to research things as best I can, try to come up with the best facts that I can, and try to form the most informed opinion that I can around those facts, and put it out there, and know that not everybody's going to agree, and know that I don't represent everybody.
On the one hand, the stakes of representation are very high for black folks who are in the media, because the media is not very diverse. Right? Or the stakes are really high for black professors or black professionals, because professionalism in universities are not very diverse in their faculty. And so there is a conundrum. Like there is something that's really complicated here, where I don't want anybody to think that I'm representing millions of people, but because of the way things work, we still have to contend with that reality. And it is a little bit of the struggle. At my son's school has this strict dress code policy. My son has dreads, right? And so he's getting in trouble with the principal. The principal calls us into the office to talk about him. So I try to explain to the principal, who is white, that listen, my son is growing his hair out for various cultural and spiritual reasons. It's a personal thing. He'll wear a knee block. We go through this whole thing. And she basically says to me, well, I talked to my one black friend. Seriously, she said, talk to my black friend about one person, right? Talk to my black friend about this, and they said
Carson.
Right. And she said they said that wearing dreads and wearing boxes of fat. Right. So that one black person for her was representative of the entire culture, including my family. Right. And so I don't know how you get out of that double bind. The double bind of the fact that because we live in a society where there are so many ceilings for black folks, there are not a lot of black people in the media. There are not a lot of black professors. There are not a lot of black executives. And so, by definition, you become representative because of those boundaries.
But that's for somebody else, though. It's not for you. But I know that I don't. And so all I can represent is Solomon Jones. That's it, And I'll try to speak intelligently on behalf of my people, right? But really, the only person that I can represent is me. And I think for me, psychologically, that takes some of the pressure off of me. And for those who think otherwise, hey, get one more black friend.
On the media part, do you see bias in the news media? There's a deeper issue here too, and if so, why does such bias exist? And how does it affect our understanding of race and police violence? But the final part of this question is, do you think journalists try to sway public opinion about the police, specifically about the police? And when you're thinking of that answer, think of, you might want to take into consideration.
Sofiy brought up a great example from Katrina. And again, some of you might be too young to understand how biased that media coverage was, but American citizens were referred to as refugees. That's right. In that coverage. And so is the media biased? Yes. Are you kidding me? Is it racially biased? Yes. Is it biased based on gender? Yes. Class? Yes. Region? Yes. The media is biased, right? The challenge really for me is not to be able to assess that, because I think that that's pretty much crystal clear and has been for a long time. The media is owned by corporations. Corporations have interests. And those interests are manifest in the cable news networks that you watch, in the newspapers that you read, the magazines that you look at online. It's all there. The critical question for us is, do we have the media literacy to discern those biases? And that's the most important question, particularly for students, right? Do you know what you're watching when you're watching? Do you understand the corporate interests that are at stake? Do you understand the lobbying interests that are at stake? Those are to me, those are the questions that you have to ask yourselves. Now, are the media trying to persuade us about police brutality? I mean, you know, we have not gotten the full story from the media on what exactly is happening in terms of the police interface with poor communities and communities of color. So if anything, the media is biased in favor of the institution, not against it, from what I've seen. And I love the reporting that my colleagues here are doing. And that's, I'm not criticizing, I'm talking about the media on the whole. And just take, for example, the media's response to the Ferguson report, right? Now listen, I love Jonathan Capehart, he's a colleague of mine at MSNBC, but Capehart's piece about in the Washington Post that said hands up was a lie, to me is bull crap, right? Because he took the forensic report out of that Department of Justice report and tried to use it to frame the fact that the entire Hands Up United movement was false because the forensics allegedly proved that his hands were not up when he got shot. Now, what I would say to all of you in this room is read the Department of Justice report on Ferguson. And you tell me, if you were a media person, if that would be the thing that you would have singled out of that report. The report shows the tyranny of police brutality and behavior in Ferguson County. And that tyranny goes from everything from sicking dogs on children to the 70% warrant rate. Can you imagine living in a community where 2/3 to 3/4 of the community has warrants by the police? Right? The petty tyranny of law enforcement in the Ferguson community is an absolute American tragedy. But the media coverage of the report, you know, they say we focus too much on Michael Brown, right? But the media coverage of the report didn't give us the good sense of that. Now, mind, look at the Department of Justice report on Cleveland. Look at the Department of Justice report on Newark, on Baltimore. Look at what the government, who does these studies on how police interface with these communities, look at what they're saying. And you will see that the media has not done a good job of giving us all the information that we need to understand it. So if anything, the bias is in favor of the criminal justice institution.
From the media side and from the side of whether or not the coverage of everything, not just the police, but of America in general is biased. So 2 years ago, 2013, Philadelphia Magazine did a cover story called Being White in Philly. And their all-white staff went out to part of North Philadelphia, Brewery Town, and interviewed all white people. I'm sorry, Fairmount, that's right. Because they divided North Philly into 15,000 different neighborhoods. But
Better to gentrify.
right, that's part of the branding. So they went out and they interviewed white people about how scary black people are. And that was basically the gist of the story. And they did this 3,000-word opinion piece, right, about you know, white people complaining about how scary their black neighbors are. And there was backlash about it. And you know, one of the first things I said was that, you know, Philadelphia Magazine should know all about being white in Philly because they have no black people on their staff.
None.
None. Right? Zero.
One lady in sales.
Right?
That's it.
Right? And so they had a panel like this one and stupidly invited me to be on it. And I said, you know, if you wanted to, because the writer said, look, we just wanted to learn about, you know, how white people feel. And I said, if you wanted to learn about how white people feel, all you had to do was talk to the guy next to you because everybody in your office is white. And they did something like that again very recently. They had a cover story about a school district in Philadelphia that's about 57% black. And they had on the cover how to find good schools for your child in Philadelphia. And they had 7 children, all of whom appeared to be white. when there's only 14% of the school district is white. That is purposeful. You have to try hard to do that. And so Tom McGrath, who's the editor, was kind enough to appear on my show. And I said, Tom, we talked about this 2 years ago when you did the Being White and Philly cover. And, you said that you were going to make some changes, that you were going to work on diversity. What have you done? And he said, well, we have some freelancers. I said, no, Tom, stop. I said, how many black people, how many black writers do you have on your staff? And he paused and he said, 0. I said, how many black editors do you have on your editorial staff? He said, 0. I said, how many Latinos, how many Asians do you have? Well, we don't ask people's race because it's an embarrassing question. Tom, how many Asians and Latinos do you have on your staff? Well, we can't, So he has no black people on his staff, but he's trying to call the magazine, Philadelphia Magazine, and write about people of color. Now, I don't blame Tom McGrath, because it's been that way at Philadelphia Magazine for decades. But Philadelphia Magazine is not alone. And so when you talk about bias, some of the bias isn't even purposeful racism. Some of the bias is just implicit bias because you know nothing about the people that you're covering, except what you see on television. So every black man is Lucius Lyon from Empire, because that's all you know. You understand what I'm saying? So, when you have nobody of color in your newsroom who has the power to actually say anything, because freelancers don't. They email their stories in. They're not there around the table when you're meeting, when you're deciding over the course of months that you're going to do that picture. See, people don't understand that in a magazine, it takes months to decide what you're going to put in there, right? The McGraw-Hill thing, where they just had the slaves came here as workers, right? It takes months and a group of people to decide after 3 or 4 edits and fact-checking what's going to go in that book. And so, if you actually have somebody there who has the power to say something, who is a person of color, who is a person who maybe doesn't even think like you, right? Then maybe you have a different outcome. But the bias comes from the fact that black people, Latino people, Asian people, people of color, people who have a different mindset are not in the
I
newsroom.
think whenever we talk about the media, we use these overarching terms like media and society without thinking about the fact that it's just people. People comprise the media, people comprise society. They come with their baggage and they come with their prejudice and they come with these ideas in their head. And I have a perfect example to talk about, being black in the newsroom, because I've been at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I hit my year anniversary September 22nd. Thank you. Thank you. And there was a Philly is Baltimore demonstration in Philadelphia after the death of Freddie Gray. And they said, Sophia, we want you to go out and live tweet, me and myself and like 5 other reporters. I said, okay, cool. I found out the hashtag was #Philly is Baltimore. I said, I'm using it. Next thing you know, the editors of the news desk said, we're not using that hashtag. I spoke to one of the editors and said, why aren't we using this hashtag? Like, we're taking ourselves out of the conversation. Why won't we use it? They said, well, Sophia, we really don't want to make it seem like we're condoning violence, and, we saw what happened in Baltimore. We really don't want to seem like we're condoning that. I said, okay, Sophia, breathe. I was like, all right, okay, cool. So I sat down to my computer and I researched, Philly is Baltimore. I said, what's their platform? I read their platform. They said that this is an anti-police brutality rally, and we are standing in solidarity with Baltimore because we share a lot of their issues. So I said, there's nothing that seems, violent about this. I talked to my editor in my department. She was like, you should use the hashtag. She talked to a social media person. She said, I told them to use the hashtag and they refused to use it. So the Daily News and Philly.com were using the hashtag because we all work in the same building, but the Enquirer chose not to use it. So someone told me, an editor told me to use the hashtag anyway when I went out. And just so that we can have a conversation afterwards and say, this is what happened when I used it, and this is what happened when I didn't. I used the hashtag, of course, tons of retweets. People are talking to me, lots of followers, Enquirer's getting a lot of followers. Then I get an email saying, Sophia, we told you not to use the hashtag, stop using it. I want to keep my job, so I'm like, all right, cool. So I stopped using it, and it's basically like I'm tweeting to myself. People are like, they're like, what are you doing? Eventually people have to say, follow Sophia Ballin if you want to see what's going on in Philadelphia in terms of Philly is Baltimore. So So then after that, they organized kind of a post-demonstration coverage meeting. And when I tell you this room was so white, like it was just like a blizzard, whiter than a blizzard. And there were like three of us, three black women. I was the youngest black person in the room. And we were talking about using it, and I said there was a preconceived notion that this was going to be a violent protest. You guys assumed that this was going to be violent. This was not an anti-police rally. This was an anti-police brutality rally. And because of that, you withdrew us out of an international conversation where we could have gained new readers and new followers. Daily News has new readers, Philly.com has new readers, but here we are without that because you guys chose to assume that this was going to be a violent demonstration. And next thing you know, they're comparing Philly's Baltimore to hate speech and saying, oh, what if the cake? And I'm like, that's apples and oranges. It's completely different. And that's when I realized how important it was that I was there. I'm sure in your classrooms you talk about diversity in the newsroom, but it made me realize what kind of fights journalists fight that we don't know about. What kind of stories? If I wasn't there to challenge that, now we're gonna have discussions about hashtags and stuff. But if I wasn't there to challenge that, would anyone have challenged it? There are so many times where I've caught things and said, no, we shouldn't use that. That doesn't sound right. That's right in my Black Twitter piece. They're saying African Americans use Black Twitter. I say, no, Black people as a whole, internationally, as in the world, use the Black diaspora uses Twitter, not just African Americans. African Americans are not the only Black people on this planet. So little things like that I have to catch. And I said, you know what, I will never make fun of Don Lemon again because I don't know what his struggle is. I don't know what wouldn't be on CNN. I don't know I don't agree with everything he says, but I'm like, I don't know what wouldn't be on CNN if he wasn't there.
If the questioner is wondering like how I could see the coverage of police differently from how he or she might be able to see it, the first thing I would say, which harkens back to something that Solomon said earlier, is just take a look at the data, right? Like, look at the data on the criminal justice system. Look at the data statewide, where black men are 5 to 7 times more likely to be stopped and arrested for marijuana possession, where the sentences are longer. Look at stop and frisk, where sometimes 8 to 10 times more likely to be stopped and frisked. Again, for the same exact crime, charged and given longer sentences. Look at the rates of black and poor people on death row across the nation, more likely to be put on death row, more likely to be executed. Look at every aspect of the criminal justice system and look at the data, look at the metrics on that, right? And then you can understand how maybe I might start to see the criminal justice system differently from someone who's not in the communities who has that experience. My interface with law enforcement is different from my white counterparts. It is profoundly different. I'm much more likely to be killed from a non-violent traffic stop than any white male in my peer group. And so I literally have a life or death sort of differential in terms of how I interact and interface. So yes, it is quite possible for you to be, maybe you have friends who are law enforcement, maybe you see law enforcement in upper class white communities, they're doing a completely different job than they're doing in the communities that I come from, the communities that I work for. So that we could actually have a different sense of it. But I would challenge the questioner to look at the data. The data is striking and terribly, terribly debilitating when you think about what this nation is supposed to represent, and you think about how race informs how our criminal justice system operates.
I think that there is a culture within a police department. So it's like a military culture, right? Where the blue matters more than the black. And so you are working with people who literally have your life in their hands. I was a police dispatcher for a number of years. And one of the things that happens on a lot of cases, a disturbance house, a disturbance highway, a person with a gun, and assist the officer, the crucial thing is knowing where the officer is so that you can send backup, right? If an officer is alone in a situation where he's hurt or he's in trouble, the crucial thing is sending backup. Now imagine you are the officer who has stood up and said that your behavior, my peers, my colleagues, your behavior is wrong. And you're the guy who needs backup. Suppose they don't come. So your life is literally in these people's hands. And so in many ways, the blue matters much more than the black. And so, you know, when I speak to groups of police officers, the Guardian Civic League, which is a black police organization in Philadelphia, asked me to come and speak. And I said to them, you know, my message to them was do more. Because our children's lives are in the balance, right? A black man is 21 times more likely to be shot and killed by police than a white man. And you can look that up in ProPublica, and they are a very respected organization that does investigative journalism. But that black officer, right, it's like you in the newsroom, Sophia, only it's not information that's at stake. It's somebody's life that's at stake. And that black officer who comes from the same neighborhoods that that young man comes from might be the only thing standing between that young man and a bullet. And so if you think that you're doing a great job by arresting a lot of people and by, you know, doing a lot of car stops and having your numbers up, you know, do more. Because the bottom line is that when the rubber hits the road and somebody's about to kill a young black man who's unarmed on the street, you might be the only thing between him and that bullet. Do more. And so, you know, those officers are under a lot of pressure to conform to a system that where you can plug and play. It's like Chip Kelly thinks he can plug and play, but he can't. We've learned that. But it's a system where you plug in different people and they play their role within that system. And so it's systemic. It's not about whether the person is black or white or Asian or whatever. You're in a system where your life depends on those people who you're working with. And if you don't play ball, then they can decide that you don't need backup. And it could mean your life. And so, you know, I think that's part of what's going on with black police officers. And
more about systemic racism than interpersonal racism.
Right.
Like, I don't really care if an individual person doesn't like me because of the color of my skin. I'm much more interested in thinking about systemic issues just because of that, because that indoctrination is really powerful. But even outside of that, implicit bias affects all of us. Yeah, it affects all of us, right? The kind of media sort of construction of black, particularly masculine identity, but black folks in general, affects all of us. Black people are more scared of black people too. Yeah. Right? And I challenge anyone, take an implicit bias test. Harvard has a free one. Go online, take an implicit bias test. You will see. We have a lot of blind spots, and implicit bias affects all of us. So there are systemic things, but there are also, it's just that the indoctrination of racism is something that impacts all of us.
I know in the question, just to piggyback back off what you said, I know in the question you said, you know, why is the city not immune to racial profiling, though they have a large black officer population? Is because no one is immune to racism. Chris Rock said racism is a disease, and I believe it. We're all afflicted. We all have it. Maybe a black person may be more likely to question it and say, hey, you know, that's not right. That's something we deal with within our community in terms of colorism and how we see each other and loving each other and seeing the humanity amongst each other, but it's also on the outside as well. So I think we may be more likely to question it and before we act upon it, but racism is a disease and we all have that within us.
Tell them what colorism is, because I think...
Oh, colorism, like light skin is usually seen as more superior towards dark skin. Yep. Light skin, you're smarter, you're prettier, dark skin, not so much.
And the media constantly reinforces that.
All the time. Actually, just to say, I studied abroad in 2013 in London. I remember meeting a lot of black British people there, and they were saying, yeah, you know, when I went to America, I was so shocked. I didn't expect, you know, to walk around and actually, my accent, and actually, you know, see people that looked like me. I thought everybody was going to be Beyonce or Carrie Hilson, and that's when I realized, like, that's all we put out to represent ourselves, or not even just put out, that's all that's accepted, you know, and into the mainstream as representatives of us. And it doesn't even look like the majority of us. They're like, yeah, you know, I could walk around and say, oh, he's from Ghana, oh, he's from Nigeria. And they were completely surprised. They didn't expect any of us to think any of us looked like them.